Good afternoon, everyone. So glad you could join us on what promises to be a very interesting discussion on how best to help student veterans find pathways to success after they graduate. The timing couldn't be better as spring semesters come to an end and the next crop of college graduates take their next steps. We've pulled together a blue chip panel of experts who can address the topic of student veteran success from all angles, from their transition from military service to school, to their time while on campus, to the corporate recruiting process, and to that first job and career choice after college. Helping post 9/11 military veterans and their families find meaningful careers after their service comes to an end is something we devote quite a lot of time and resources at American Veterans Group. It's core to our mission as Wall Street's first and only public benefit corporation. Through the partnership we launched a year ago with nonprofit VetJobs, we're proud to say that more than 200 veterans and their spouses have been recruited and hired by some of the country's highest profile companies. More than 70 Fortune 500 companies are now part of the AVG Veterans Jobs Network as we work with the nonprofit VetJobs to create a robust pipeline of qualified military job candidates. Of those hired to date, the majority, upwards of 70%, are former or active enlisted service members. Nearly 60% are members of representative minority groups, and more than 40% report as women. We're making a difference for the populations of veterans who benefit the most. As a veteran-owned investment banking institution, American Veterans Group, we've created an economic engine that supports and drives our social mission. It's a model unique to Wall Street, and we're having a measurable impact in the veteran community as well. Today's panel discussion is an important component of our mission as we provide a platform for decision makers and thought leaders to share their insights and best practices, all with the goal of creating pathways for veteran success and positive change forward. Campus to Career is the second in our series of VetSuccess virtual events, with more to come. Special thanks to James Schmeling from the National Defense University Foundation for moderating today's panel discussion. We're honored to have him with us today. Thanks so much, James, for your support. The same goes for our other panelists: Will Hubbard of the Veterans Education Success, Alex Nieves from Service to School, Jessica Wise from the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium, Sean Gillespie from JP Morgan Chase. Also on the panel are higher ed leaders who work directly with student veterans: Dave Sauerwein from my MBA alma mater, the University of Virginia, and Jayetta Rogers from the University of Tennessee. And we've asked current student veterans and a recent graduate now in his first corporate role to round out the panel. We're pleased to have, from my alma mater, the University of Virginia, Tommy Busterud, a Darden Business School MBA student who is also serving as Graduate School's Student Veteran Organization Club President. And Jake Glazer, a recent Princeton graduate and now an associate in McKinsey & Company. As you can see, we've put together a stellar lineup today of leaders who are looking for positive momentum forward for the military community. Thanks to all of you for being here and for your willingness to share your ideas and best practices. With that, I'm going to turn it over to James to get the discussion underway. The floor is yours, James.
Hi, all. I think that James is actually experiencing some technical difficulties finding his way in from the lobby, which is no problem. We'll still dive right in and he'll make his way in. So I wanted to start out by just having some questions for our incredible panelists. Jake, I wanted to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about your experience as you have transitioned from being a student veteran and your kind of path that you took into your corporate role that you're in now.
Sure. First, testing mic, all good? Okay, cool. So I got out in 2018. I was an active Marine for 5 years. I didn't have the grades before the military to get into a good undergrad. So I took classes at community college for about 3 semesters. And then I transferred to Princeton, studied politics, and then joined more or less the traditional pipeline into consulting, which was I did a junior internship, so into my senior year, and then I graduated last year and joined full-time from there. And I'm based out of Austin, Texas. I work in McKinsey's office, primarily do growth strategy for a wide variety of clients. So worked in e-commerce, banking, insurance, some travel stuff. It's pretty dynamic, changes by the project. Katie, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it definitely did. Thank you. And Tommy, turning it over to you as a current student, what are your experiences like on campus? And tell us a little bit about the resources that you've been able to access in your time.
Absolutely. Great to meet everyone. Tommy Busrud. I'm the current president of the Darden Military Association. I've served 10 years in the Army as an infantry officer and later a Special Forces Green Beret. Really enjoyed my time at Darden so far. It's a great school, but in particular, the DMA, or the Darden Military Association, has been pretty instrumental for me as a veteran, both in the summer before coming to Darden with my transition out of the military, providing resources, support, people to talk to, vets who had made that transition, and then also in the recruiting process as well during our first year. So just from general advice on different industries to recruit for, all the way through for me. I also, Jake, I'm headed to McKinsey this summer, but I recruited for consulting and really had a lot of great resources within the DMA to practice for case interviews, for any of the recruiting networking calls or coffee chats. And because of that, I think it was pretty instrumental to my success as well as most of my classmates. And I hope to continue that in the next year. But really, I think the best way that Darden does it from my perspective is, they have a robust presence with the DMA. After this year, it'll be 500 alumni members of the DMA. They help with recruiting, and it's very structured in the way that works as a timeline throughout the fall. And then there's just generally great mentorship and a sense of community here for any of the other concerns or questions or ideations as you go through the process of leaving the military and joining the corporate world. But I'm happy to be here today.
Great. Thanks, Tommy. Jayada, I want to turn it over to you from the perspective of working in a university. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the University of Tennessee to support student veterans and any of the partnerships that you have cultivated in the corporate world and your approach to that to help ensure that student veterans are able to make that pathway and find opportunities in their employment after school?
Yes, so we're very fortunate in that we have a Veterans Center on campus. I know that's not always something that all schools have, but we are very fortunate that we have one. We can connect with those students on a personal level too. They can come in and use the lounge. We have a study area, computer free printing. So the students can come in and meet another veteran just to hang out, have a cup of coffee. We have coffee, snacks, popcorn. Anything to get away, for those students to get away from some of the chaos on campus. And when I say chaos, I mean like the busy sidewalks, just being around 18, 19-year-old students, sometimes it's hard to fit in. So we encourage students to come in, use the Veterans Center. We have our own veterans orientation so that we can get those students onboarded the way we would like to have them onboarded. Know that we have those resources on campus, know that we have a Veterans Center. We have very specific programming for those students. We don't have a career person in our office, but we do collaborate with the Career Center. And so that person works with our student population for resume writing, for workshops, just trying to translate a military resume to a corporate resume. So we just do different types of programs and things. We just want to make sure that students get what they need in order to finish that semester strong and eventually graduate.
Thank you. Jake and Tommy, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Were there any programs at your respective campuses that were particularly helpful as you were looking at your next steps after graduation and exploring different career paths?
I'll take it first from the enlisted side. I would imagine Tommy had quite a bit different experience from the MBA side. So I knew I wanted to go into consulting, and it's a path so well trodden to go from like the officer corps into an MBA program into consulting. He's nodding his head if you can't see that. On the undergrad side, being enlisted and then going to one of these, what we call target schools, which honestly, I'm not a fan of the term, but it's just like essentially where certain firms try to target their recruiting efforts. There's not that many people that have already gone down that path. So the programs aren't as set in stone, but it is something that's being done right now. For example, just yesterday I reached out to the Princeton recruiter for McKinsey, and we're setting up a couple events for the Princeton Student Veterans Association at the school. And it's going to be exclusive to the vets there that are in the undergrad program, as well as their spouses. And so like, I can't necessarily say that there are excellent programs that I used, but I can see the tides start to shift, that there's more out there. So just, you kind of got to be on your game in terms of Googling when it comes to be recruiting season, keeping in touch with the campus recruiters, and then also make sure that you're at least somewhat involved with your veteran groups, because those are the individuals that are going to be reached out to by the recruiters or by the corporations themselves. I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jake. I think it's so well structured at this point on the grad school side in terms of like what's available. So we have a consulting club, we'll have guest speakers. In particular, we have vet-specific recruiting Zoom calls with firm reps. So there would be like a general Bain, BCG, McKinsey recruiting chat or event, but there'd also be specific veteran breakout sessions. And I think having some type of process like that in the undergrad space would be really important. I think we have many different opportunities here, but if it's possible to replicate that or make it more accessible for veterans to kind of figure out what's out there, I think that was something that I experienced initially was, I only had heard from other veterans that like, hey, you can recruit consulting or investment banking, but there are a lot of other opportunities out there. So for me, the best things were the clubs, the speakers, and then specific firm sessions targeted at veterans. So I think in the undergrad space, that would be very important to develop.
Great, thank you so much. I think James has entered into the room. James, are you able to hear us all okay?
I am able to hear you just fine. Sorry for those technical difficulties.
No problem.
I think everybody sounds like they've proceeded with a little bit of discussion, so apologies for jumping in and going from there. But Ben, thanks for your opening remarks and all of that. Tommy, thanks for those comments. I think that's a really important perspective from a student perspective, understanding how education can work best for you. I remember when I went to college after I served in the Air Force, now a long time ago, but then went to law school, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and particularly in law school, and it really was important to have peers and others tell us a lot, and then to have the organizations that were responsible for our education and career prep to really think about what they needed to tell veterans that maybe was a little bit different. So it's good to see a lot of familiar faces, people who I've known and worked with over the last dozen years. Thanks for everybody bringing us together, especially AVG. I'm privileged to be on the board of Vet Jobs and to have worked with them now for probably about 8 years. Before I was at the National Defense University Foundation, I co-founded the Institute for Veterans and Military Families and worked with a lot of you on the career progression pieces. And then I went over to Student Veterans of America and focused on the education experience, and then really melded those education to career pieces because I thought it was really critical. All of the research that we did found that veterans were very successful in education, they were very successful in careers, but they still needed to know what they didn't know. And many of you have participated in a lot of those things, both choosing educational programs and choosing career transition, giving advice and participating across the spectrum of activities. So I'm really glad to have all of you here. I am going to start off and just dive into a few questions broadly and generally, and our panelists can answer those. And then I'll have some specific questions for particular panelists. But I'll start with a really broad one. What resources and organizations are available for the career professionals to really support veteran students and to help you support veteran students? What have you seen in your experience in these roles as being very valuable to you? And I'll call names in a second if I don't get volunteers. Dave, Jada, others.
Sure, I can jump in, James.
Sure, thanks, Dave.
And I am not a career expert, but I just happen to be married to one. And so as I was anticipating this, my wife is the executive director of UVA, the Career Center. And I asked her some of these questions, and what she relies on is NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and that they have a lot of resources, both for students themselves and for folks who are in the career field who are looking for advice on how best to support veterans. And they have some nice websites. I'd be happy to share links to those spaces if that's useful to folks that can help with basics like how to write a resume, that sort of thing. In fact, when I got this information, I sent it out to my veterans yesterday just to make sure they had access to it. So that's one.
Yeah, those conferences have been very valuable, I've thought. I also have really enjoyed the HERC conferences and other things. Jessica, I think, is here and can talk a little bit about that. Jayetta, you have been involved in strategic initiatives at your university. What do you see your career professionals using?
So we actually have a career center for career development and academic exploration. And so we work very closely with that office to make sure that those students get career services that are applicable to them. I've mentioned the resume workshop where we translate a military resume to civilian resume or corporate resume. We'll have those employers come in and do things like a networking night. When I say that, I mean employers that are specifically looking to hire veterans. We'll have a veterans networking night where they can come in and speak to veterans. They can bring their resume. They'll do mock interviews. Just things to help them ease into that corporate world. We do speech communication workshops. Public speaking in the military is a little bit different in the corporate world. And so you made a good point. Someone said sometimes students don't know what they don't know. And that's where we try to bridge the gap.
I think that's a really important component of it. How do you make sure that you're communicating with the veterans who are students on your campuses so that they know all of those resources? How do you make sure they don't slip through the cracks and not even connect with you?
So one thing we do, James, is we have a transition 201 class that is specifically just for veteran students. And part of that class just talks about campus culture, GI Bill benefits, but one of the components of that class is a career section. And so we will connect them with a career coach in the Career Center and talk about different things they can utilize for the services they have. Our career services area has a website that has just one section dedicated for veterans resources for veteran-owned businesses or companies that they partner with that are looking to hire veterans. So outreach is key to reach those students. And I feel like the earlier we engage those students, the more we can reach.
And for everybody who's a campus professional, are you registering your students as veterans in order to make sure that they get all of your communications when they first enroll, or do they have to find you first?
We usually have veterans self-report, and usually they do that just because a lot of them are using VA education benefits, so we want them flagged, but we also give priority registration to veterans. So we ask that they self-report, and that's really what we use.
That makes a lot of
It's
sense.
been a challenge. It's been a challenge that way because of the protected status for veterans. And for a while, I was struggling to get my colleagues to share any information, but I was able to send them an email that they could send out to veterans. And so then people can self-report, as Jada said, and list so that I can share information. And then it's up to me to provide information, not too excessively, because of course it will be shut down. They will sign out. They will ignore it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that that's one of those best practice pieces, is that your Office of Student Enrollment, by whatever name it goes by, can often communicate on your behalf at least once to everybody, to tell them about the services that are available, how to contact you, and how to opt in. And I think that's a really, really critical component of it. I'm going to jump over to Will Hubbard for a minute, if Will is on. I'm looking for his name to make sure I see it. Great, thanks, Will. A specific question for you. What can high quality education providers do to increase access for student veterans?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The thing that I think is often overlooked among some of the top campuses in the country, and really the top tier higher ed professionals, is just that they often ignore the Department of Defense, which is a mistake. And it might not be as intuitive compared to thinking about like VA GI Bill benefits, but the reality is that's where these folks start. They start as members of the military, and then they become veterans. And with tuition assistance dollars, you can really get a lot of good exposure early on, and get in front of a lot of these folks who are going to eventually become veterans and then turn on their GI Bill benefits. Now, the big barrier that many of these campuses face, of course, are the caps on tuition assistance per credit hour, which many schools find to be prohibitive. But if you look at it as a overall life cycle and recognize that those students, the likelihood that they convert to GI Bill students over time is so high that it just makes good dollars and cents. And there's a lot of business schools, schools that are businesses, for-profit schools that have taken advantage of this and learned that they can be very successful with that model. And I think a lot of higher ed has not quite caught up to that, or has not done the analysis to see that they can make it work. So that would be something I'd encourage every school to take a look at.
Thanks, Will. It's actually a topic that I talked about yesterday in a group discussion focused on the AI workforce in particular. And one of the things that we talked about with that group was the importance of helping identify what are the career paths into particular opportunities, and communicating those early to service members, whether they're enlisted or officers, and helping them understand what is the career path if they want to advance within DoD as a civilian, within the military, or if they want to get out and do something that takes advantage of their skills. But starting with voluntary education and tuition assistance, and then moving into GI Bill, can often be a really robust opportunity. And for the employers here, I'll talk about this in a minute, but one of the key advantages of reaching out early to folks who are still in service and talking to them about opportunities is, if you need a cleared workforce, many of them have clearances that can come to work for you with those clearances already in place, and then develop the hard skills that they need and really build on the professional skills that they have as members of the military, what used to be called soft skills, and which is now moving towards other nomenclatures. I think human intelligence and the opportunity to pair that knowledge with the advantages of education benefits can be a real help. Anything you want to add, Will?
No, I think that's a good capture. I mean, the reality is a lot of cutting edge industries are going to rely on things that the military provides that they can't inherently get themselves from the traditional civilian workplace. So getting in there early and often is definitely the way to do it.
Yeah, makes sense. So Alex, one of the things that you do over at Service to School is help prep people for college. And I assume part of your model is letting them know what they can expect from colleges, but tell me a little bit about what you do and what are the challenges that you're helping veterans overcome as they're starting higher education, applying to higher education, and then pursuing higher education.
All right. Yeah. Yes, James. Thank you. Here at Service to School, what we do is provide that college counseling to the service members in the transition period. So many of them are still in service, 6 months, 8 months, a year out from separation, and we're providing them with the feedback or guidance on where they should be, depending on the schools, their interests, expectation management, what to expect during that transition, how to access their benefits. And in general, just asking, hearing them, listening to all their questions, because many of them don't have any idea what this process is like.
Yeah.
And we're there walking them through that whole process from where the websites look like. This is the Common App. This is where you apply to these schools. This is where you access the VA benefits. So we're really walking them through this whole process transition and make sure they have all the support they need from our end. And the challenge that we see from our applicants is that they have no idea where to start. And also for them is understanding the timelines on how, applications come out and what they didn't service and how they translate it. So, if we get them early in the process, so in 6 months, 8 months out, this is definitely a smoother process compared to some there. We talk to them a month before they're separating and they want to go to school right away. It's pretty tight timeline for them to help them navigate that field. But a lot of it is just being there with them through that whole process.
Yeah, that's certainly something I wish I had had when I transitioned. I went to college in Iowa, which is my home state, where I returned, and I got one piece of good college advice because I wanted to go to law school. And they said, don't go to law school the same place you go to undergrad. That was the only advice that I got. And so I looked at the 3 public colleges in Iowa, said, I don't want to be a teacher. And that's what the University of Northern Iowa does. That's not at all what they do, but that's what everybody perceived as the teacher's college. And I didn't know any better. So I went to Iowa State as an undergraduate so that I could go to Iowa for law school. And then after I moved through that process and learned a little bit more about law school applications from people who I got to know, I made other applications besides Iowa. But I had no idea what I was doing in terms of selecting an undergraduate school. I just assumed all colleges taught mostly the same things, and it didn't really much matter where I went. And I had absolutely no concept of the difference between a public and a private, or the cost of either of them, or the available financial aid. So resources like yours are, I think, really critical. I think Warrior Scholar Project does similar work, and there are other. Student Veterans of America's chapter-based model also, I think, is really ideal. But I think the key is connecting them to resources so that they can make some sort of an informed decision. They'll figure it out. They're pretty smart. They understand how to succeed once they're there, but not knowing where to start, huge issue. Once they're on campus, do you continue to work with them?
For some, yes, we have the service school models. We help them get admitted to the schools of their dreams, and ideally come back and they pay it forward with us. So there's still a connection that we have with them, and we also have a pilot program now that we're walking them. We want to make sure we're maintaining communication and seeing how the whole process is. So we have mentorship while they're in school as well, not just an application process.
Yeah, I think that pay it forward model is really valuable because they see their peers as trusted sources of advice, which I think is really useful. I'm still in contact with some of my veteran cohort from law school and even undergrad. The next question I'm going to share is with Jessica, and I'd like to ask you a little bit about what opportunities you see for veterans in higher education, and why should they be a talent pool that colleges reach out to and recruit into their colleges as students?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm from the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium. Our mission is to diversify staff and faculty positions within higher ed. So that's my lens coming into this conversation. We know that, and you all have heard this before, everything we need to run an installation or a base, we need to run a college campus. So all those functions are available there. And James, to your point, we hear things like, oh, I don't want to teach. I don't need jobs in higher ed. So it's a nice way to talk to our veterans about what the opportunities are there. And so we need all of those positions. We've seen really great synergies, particularly with fields like IT, healthcare support, contracting, supply officers, all those pieces can fit into those roles, but lawyers, facilities folks, all the above. So it's a kind of an untapped pool for higher education. We talked a little bit about the services we have for our veterans, and I'll drop a link in there, but really where we need to work is really educating our hiring managers and our committees to think about veterans and military spouses, I'll put in there as well, as an untapped pool that they are. So they're well trained. We know that they're going to come in and be able to hit the ground running. They have incredible expertise, and they have some of those nuances that we don't always think about. I know when my husband transitioned into a higher ed position, one of his favorite pieces of his job that he would have never identified was working with undergraduate students, because it really aligned with his work working with enlisted folks. And so he really had that kind of mission feeling and was able to tap back into that mentorship, that what he was able to do in his military career. So the why is because higher ed is looking for diverse, ready to work, highly skilled individuals, and our veteran and our military spouse populations are ready to fill those roles. What we need to do in higher ed is do a better job at evaluating resumes, understanding what's going to be the difference in the interview process. So we know our veterans don't necessarily ask questions because they're going to go in and hit the ground running and figure it out themselves. So that's our job on the higher ed side, and the veterans and our military spouses are the perfect candidates for those roles. So we can step up and do better. And I think it also achieves some of our diversity goals that we've been working for many, many years. And we know that our diversity in our higher ed workforce lags behind the gorgeous diversity we have in our students. So there's many whys, but we have a lot of work to do to make that a reality.
Yeah, I think there's great opportunities in higher education for veterans to go to work. Some of them are going to go to work and then earn degrees. Some of them are going to earn degrees and go to work. Some of them are just going to go straight from military DoD roles into higher education workplaces. And I will say that in my time in higher education, working for the University of Iowa and working for Syracuse University, those were two of my best workplaces. I really enjoyed all of the professionals I got to work with. I think people overlook skills that are really relevant, whether those are administrative skills or other sorts of contracting, purchasing skills. I think you're right, IT, lab work and other things like that. And then I do think that it does help with the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, because the military does tend to have a very diverse population that's representative of our population broadly. So it's a great talent recruitment piece there. But when I lectured at a variety of universities over the years, it's really amazing. They don't think about the military as a source of talent because there's a perception of who military members are and what the roles are. And I think that's because DoD doesn't really describe well what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And I think that actually hurts DoD retention. So getting folks in recruitment and getting folks who are veterans to be in those workforces in college actually exposes students to the opportunities that might come in defense and national security. So I think that's a great opportunity as well. I do think that those are fantastic. Thanks for sharing that piece of it. I'm going to transition over a little bit now into the career aspects of it. And I think Sean Gillespie is here. Sean, it's been a long time since we connected. I had actually forgotten that you were an enlisted veteran yourself before you were at JP Morgan Chase. Tell us a little bit about the employer perspective, because you're responsible for campus recruitment and a lot of the folks who come into JP Morgan from the college campuses. And Sean, you're on mute if you're here. I know you had some technical difficulties with this platform yesterday, so I'll give you a minute and come back to you if you'd like. All right, hearing nothing from Sean, I will come back to him and hope he can resolve the issue. By the way, it looks like you're on mute from my side panel if that's the issue. I'm going to go to Jake. Jake, you started to talk a little bit about this, but I think McKinsey is a great employer of choice. And I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about exploring career opportunities, why there, why other places, and what you want people to know.
Yeah, sure. So I knew I wanted to go into consulting. Well, okay, let's rewind. Before going to my undergrad, I didn't know what consulting was. I didn't know it existed. But while I was there, it's a school where it's very common. Tommy brought it up too. It's very common for people at that type of school to get funneled into, call it maybe one of four areas. One is consulting, two would be like banking, three, law school, and four, maybe academia. That's not to say that everybody does that, but those are, I would say, like the four main buckets that people tend to fall into. So I did my homework. I didn't want to go to law school. I didn't want to get a PhD. Banking looked really tiresome. And what was left was consulting. That's not to say it's not tiresome too, but that's what I ended up taking an interest in. So I attended some recruiting events, and I found that it's anecdotal. It's just me here, but I found that the veterans at McKinsey in those recruiting events that they were hosted virtually at the time, they were really willing to take an interest in what I cared about. And I wanted to be able to, select the office I wanted to work out of. And I was curious about their experiences. And they thought that I could just tell that they actually cared about me. The individuals that I spoke to, I still, now that I'm a, full-time employee here, we still hang out. We talk to each other. I've gotten to work with one of them since then. And that's not to be like a giant spiel on, McKinsey's the greatest or anything like that. It's just my personal experience and why I chose that path, and then why I dedicated my time towards that firm. There are plenty of other corporations out there that take an interest, that have awesome vet groups. BCG and Bain are the easiest ones to look at as well, because they're the direct competitors. And at the end of the day, it's just a matter of where you find people that you think you want to hang out with. All the work between BCG, Bain, McKinsey, other consulting firms, honestly, is probably very similar. But it's just a matter of, one, where your resume hits, where you get the interview, where you get the job, and then if you're put in a great position to be able to choose, just choose, based on what you think is going to be best for you. I'd say my biggest piece of advice in the recruiting process would be two things. One is, do not self-select out of anything. It doesn't matter what school you're in, doesn't matter what grades you have. It does to an extent, but the reality is you will not get a job that you do not apply to. You have to throw your name in the hat. And the second piece of that would be, that kind of is just don't self-select out of any process and just go for it. Don't forget who helped you out. Reach back out to them and ask how you can pay it back, pay it forward. But that's really what it's all about, is finding the people that you want to spend a lot of time with. And I'll add another piece. When you're recruiting, it is your time to be selfish. No one cares about your career more than you do. So take the time, right? Take the time to maybe hang out with friends a little bit less during application season, submit the applications that you think is right, and make the biggest possible pivot for your career towards a positive trajectory in that moment, because years down the road, it'll really help you out. So I'll hop off my soapbox here, but I hope everyone just takes that to heart. Just apply, in quality repetitions there. Don't just send it across the board.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because whatever you start with may not be what you're going to end with. It could be that you'll end up in a 20-year or 30-year career with your first employer and just promote through that. It could be, though, that this is the opening of a door to see what else is there, particularly in consulting firms, because you're working with so many other companies. You see what those environments are like. You see what those roles are like. You got to know your peers and your clients and customers, and just starting somewhere, I think, is a great way to learn. Tommy, what would you add to that? Where you're at right now in school is one of those premier schools that really places people across a range of roles.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, Jake, 100% agree. Really important as a veteran not to self-select. But I guess I'll start out just with some brief stats. Just like what Jake was saying, just because you're a veteran may have experiences that are a little bit different than a typical background. In the DMA this year, every veteran that recruited investment banking had at least 2 job offers from investment banks at the end of the recruiting cycle. And I believe everyone else in the DMA that recruited for consulting, there was one exception to this that was more tied to a geographic issue with offices, got at least 1 consulting offer. And the remainder were successful recruiting in general management. And so it's very important not to self-select, just as Jake was saying. But I think similar to my experience, I'm going to McKinsey this summer for my summer internship. And what they and a lot of the firms in general did really well is they had a recent alumni or someone that could really kind of give more of a one-on-one instruction of what it's like from a veteran perspective. And because they already have those veterans in their workforce, I believe that they can also hear about your experiences and what you've done in the military and kind of help guide you on hey, like if you were in a combat arms branch of the military, you may not necessarily know yet how to do a financial model, but you have the intangibles, the leadership skills, the time management, the project management skills. You have that to get to where you want to be. And I think the companies that reach out to veterans early on campus and kind of can articulate how that's possible for a veteran to see themselves at that company are the ones that are really successful hiring. And in general, to my knowledge, end up having pretty successful employees that are veterans, and they have, at least from my personal experience at Darden with my class and the class before, very high likelihood of a successful hire. So in terms of where those firms are spending their time with recruiting, they take that tailored approach. There's usually a pretty solid outcome for veterans.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important component of it. Understanding a little bit about what your firm is doing to help veterans succeed by making them aware of the things that they didn't know is really a piece that's important. I think having served, you also understand a variety of things that are really important to employers, including, although it's not the same language, mission command. You know, the idea that you are going to have a function ahead of you that's based on what the overall goals are of the organization or the division or unit that you're attached to, and that you're going to make decisions and pursue those things within your scope of authority. And I think that that's a really important component of it. I do think those professional team building skills, the communication skills, and frankly, the adaptability and ability to learn are something that sometimes are underestimated. One thing that I think the military does really well is teach people how to learn, and that they continue to do that every time they change roles or transition. So that's a straightforward piece of that. I know we're going to take questions from the audience. It's over in the chat if you have questions specifically. Sean, I think I see from the chat that you're still not able to talk to us, but if there's anything you want to share, feel free to type it in. Otherwise, if your mic is working and the platform's working for you, let's go ahead and ask you one more time. All right, I will take questions from the audience then. Any that you want to put in the chat on the side, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, I'll take those questions or make a comment. We've got about 15 minutes left, so there's an opportunity here for you to get your questions into all these experts.
James, while you're waiting for a question, I'd like to contribute a little bit there to that conversation. One of the skills that I think veterans bring, in addition to some that Tom mentioned and Jake talked about, is and you alluded to this in terms of learning, is the ability to deliver and receive feedback in a really direct and timely way. And it's something that is practiced in the military and is practiced, it is maintained, I think, by veterans when they leave. And so they are able to participate in organizations and structures that allow for direct feedback, that allows that learning to really take place. You know, you did this wrong, do it this way from now on. And the veteran can receive that and do that without having a roller coaster ride along with it. So I think that that's a skill set that they bring. In addition, I would say that that all people who are searching for positions need to look at the values of the organization, the skills that they bring, and their interests. And if you can combine those things where they come together, those three, that's a really great way to approach it. And I would call your attention to the chat because Sean put something in there.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually read that out loud. I recommend search and apply to internships early. Our campus recruiting team started recruiting in January 24 for summer 25 roles. I think it's really critical, right? You've got to be early if you can. If you're not early, don't give up. You just may not have some of the opportunities you would have otherwise if you were earlier. So pay attention early, think about where you want to go, what you want to do, and what roles you want to explore. I think that's really an important piece. Katie Powers is directing a question here for the college career professionals. Is there any sort of resource that companies could provide that would be helpful to you to connect them with veterans and employers? Is there anything from universities that would be helpful for you to have? So we'll go to the career professionals first. Anything you need from employers? All right, we'll go over to the employers for a minute. Anything that universities could do better to connect with you? And I'll call on my old colleague, Jim Beamsdorfer, if nobody else has a comment here.
I'll jump in there and say that there are so many of we work with over 500 colleges and universities, and so many of them really, this is a valuable pool. They want to expand their veteran recruitment, and they need more connections. So if there's an opportunity, if there's a regional thing happening, they'll show up. So I think there's also just this opportunity for more connections and more engagements. HERC is happy to serve as kind of a conduit for some of that action, because there is so much know-how, and it works both ways. When we get our hiring managers out in front of veterans, hopefully the veterans walk away with a little bit more of a skill set, but I know that our hiring managers and our selection committees come away with a lot of information that they can take back and use. I think there was a comment earlier about educating folks, and that's selfishly probably the best way. I can talk about this until I'm blue in the face, but the more that they can connect with real folks looking for jobs, it's powerful.
Yeah, get in a room and talk to other people. Absolutely. Jim.
Yeah, hey James. I can't seem to get my camera to turn on, but you know, the one thing we've tried to do with a lot of our campus recruiting and our military recruiting efforts is, when it makes sense, kind of tie some things together, right? Get more bang for our buck in our relationships. So we're in New Jersey, or we're headquartered in New Jersey. We have a really good relationship with Rutgers, but we also have relationships with other campuses. And we look to say, how can we tie that so that we make a trip to Rutgers to talk about careers at Prudential, and we take some people there to talk about careers at Prudential, and let's invite the military students, the veterans, to come as well, right? So we don't want to have necessarily separate things. Now, what we have done is we have had some very separate and specific events, like with the Student Veteran House or whatever they have on a campus, to really do a little bit deeper dive to talk about careers, to maybe look at some resumes, give tips about interviewing. And what we do when we do that is we're just creating a relationship, right? So it's about getting our name as an employer into their ears, and it's also giving them some help. When we do that, we make sure we take hiring managers with us so that they get exposure to the candidates. Because I got to be honest, you know, I was an officer, so I went to college, I went to the military, and then I went to civilian employment. In my mind, there's no different if you did it in the different order, right? If you went to the military and then you went to college, you still have military experience and a college degree. But most recruiters, most hiring managers look at that a lot differently. So we have to help them to not place student veterans into this category of, oh, somebody who's 22 years old and went from high school to college, and now we're going to put them in a traditional intern program and maybe put them into these very junior positions. So by getting them, the hiring managers, exposed to the talent early, you open their eyes to what that talent really is.
Yeah. I think that's a really critical piece. And what I would say to those organizations that are working on campuses with veterans looking at careers, make sure you understand what your other career services offices are doing and how to overlap with those. Because if you can combine those efforts and not have to have them come back more than once, you're going to have more opportunities as a result. Ben, I see your hand.
Thanks, James. No, I really appreciate this. Is a really great dialogue. You know, one of the things that I heard from Tommy and Jake's experience too, which is really interesting, is kind of how well paved the MBA path was for Tommy and the infrastructure that was associated for you know, an MBA, where you had the engagement from, you know, veteran alumni, you had the career services, you know, office kind of already helping with resume prep, interview prep, and those internship applications, you know, come sooner rather than later. And for, I guess, veterans going into an MBA program, I'm probably no different. Like, you kind of go into the program knowing what your job is afterwards, versus Jake's experience seems like it was completely different, where there was very little infrastructure. And, he kind of went into it with open eyes and didn't know, what he wanted to be at, had not met a McKinsey consultant before, things like that. So I think those are what I've seen are some two different experiences that are probably more the norm for, an MBA veteran versus a student undergraduate veteran. And, I know UVA in particular, Tommy's mentioned of this, is, going across the street into, the undergraduate campus to, sharing these best practices with graduate community that's already happening on the MBA program. So that's probably something that could be replicated across campuses nationwide, is, take some lessons learned from your MBA programs and apply it into your undergraduate programs. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. Jake, Tommy, is there anything else, I missed you'd like to share?
Yeah, definitely, Ben. I think it's a couple things. If you have a really good undergrad student veterans club that gives you the knowledge of like who's a veteran at school and like what they're interested in, then you can go to the career center for the undergrad side. You can connect with them. They can connect with the Veterans Club. If you want to put anything out as a company that's recruiting, you can do that officially through the school. The Veterans Club can also distro that again to generate some awareness. And definitely, Ben, we're planning next year, working with Dave here, to get some more involvement on our side with the undergrad. So if your school does have a business school, I think there's a lot of value we can add in terms of resume reviews, or just kind of like our experience with, even though, like, especially with second years that have a summer internship under their belt, but like a little more experience out the industry, and just frankly more of a connection as well, as they kind of move forward. But if you have a good student club, and then your career centers like that kind of link between a company and that student club, I think that's the best way you can reach and kind of maintain that relationship with that student as they go through their process.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here. Oh,
please go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, just real quick. Where we have a little bit of a gap are folks that receive their MBAs at places like Naval Postgraduate School. So that's an untapped potential for us to lean into candidates, but also those folks don't get those same sort of services that Tommy was talking about. So we can also, if we have that team represented here, I think there's a lot of places that we can help support those transitions, because the skills are there, but they're not necessarily making those linkages that you think they would through a traditional undergrad experience or graduate experience.
Yeah, and I would just say too, on the company side, like Jake was mentioned with McKinsey, the MBA to McKinsey pathway could be very well paved. However, the undergraduate pathway is becoming more paved, which is encouraging. And from the over 100 companies that I've spoken to, I think that is where the puck is going for sure, where they're thinking more about the student veteran undergraduate experience, and aligning the MBA program to that of the undergraduate side, which is a really interesting development. The one thing for college administrators as well is you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel as well. So you can work with organizations like Vet Jobs that are connected to these corporate recruiters as well, and help, ask for help. You don't have to necessarily do it all yourself. You can ask for help, because a lot of these, you might have an organization like a Vet Jobs that has tentacles out there to all these different corporate recruiters that specifically kind of might work with military folks. Also, building that network with military employee resource group leaders of these various companies as well. So, there's no question. I think there is it sounds from this discussion, a very real, handicap for former enlisted undergraduate veterans starting out building that network. And I think, we just got to, there's resources out there, I think. Well, and then I saw another question about, making sure, if you're on the school side, how do you get the word out early to your veterans and stress the importance of this? Because if you maybe you meet up 4 months after campus starts and you miss those important internship application deadlines, so you don't know what you don't know. So that's another thing. I think I would suggest probably rounding them up sooner rather than later. Maybe start networking early to find a way to stress the importance of taking this, the job part seriously sooner rather than later, just so you don't miss out on any opportunities. I don't know if there's anything else from the panel that you've seen.
Yeah, I want to throw out a couple of things here really quickly. One, the Veteran Jobs Mission actually maintains a great list of companies that are hiring and that are part of the Veteran Jobs Mission. They're culturally competent. They're interested in veterans. They've demonstrated that. They're very good. Hiring Our Heroes out of the Chamber of Commerce is another one that does an amazing job across so many employers, and again, builds that corporate competency and so on. Vet Jobs and Military Spouse Jobs, where I'm on the board of both, also do a great job. They also offer some skills-based training and assessment and things like that. So take advantage as colleges and professionals to connect to those organizations that are already in the career space, because they've already built networks for you that you can take advantage of. And oftentimes they do events around the country that are on campuses or adjacent to campuses and that you can participate in. Make sure you're taking every advantage of career fairs like are done with various organizations, or the National Conference for Student Veterans of America, or any of those sorts of things. I think it's really an important component to tap into those. The college aspects are great. The career aspects are great. I do want to hit on the community colleges piece, because there are a lot of people who are going to community colleges for a specific skill set that are really important. And I do think that those are all opportunities. Look, folks, we're at the end of our time. We've got 3 minutes left. Ben, we promised you some time to close this out. So if you'd like to do that closeout, we'll turn it to you.
No, I appreciate everybody for setting this up, and James, really appreciate your leadership, and really everybody's leadership. I mean, I've been impressed with the thoughts from this panel and the real leadership that has brought us together. The one thing I've loved over the last 6 years is the tightness of the military community, and it's filled with a lot of great people that want to do great things for military and serve something bigger than themselves. So I would encourage this to be a constant dialogue. I think we can share contact information from folks that signed up and registered, and for me specifically, please reach out. Love to continue the conversation. I think this is definitely where the puck is going. We don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. I think there's a lot of great best practices out there. There's a lot of great leaders like the folks that are on this panel that are doing some great stuff that I think, the rest of the community can benefit from. So, really appreciate everybody's time, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Hey, this is fantastic. Thanks very much, Ben. I am going to call attention to one more thing that Sean just posted. LinkedIn, take some time to get to know it. There are people who are expert in this, and they provide a lot of value there in their veterans communities, and a few people in particular. But do that search, follow his guidance there. Look for the name of the company, where they're at, and somebody's branch of service, and you'll have a built-in connection list of people who you can reach out to for informational interviews and other things. Thanks very much to everybody. Thanks, Ben, for getting this all together, and thanks to the team here for all of the work that went into this and getting panelists ready and everything else. Really appreciate all of you, and keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody.